I have to be honest, I'm not the personality style that likes a lot of data. It's a flaw, but I'm an I personality style. If you're familiar with the DISC tool, which I think is a great tool as an aside. But the C style loves analysis, data, and that's why I like to surround myself with people who have that style. Nonetheless, this video is about metrics and metrics in the area of culture and leadership, which are even that much more difficult to measure. It's a challenge. But when you look at the challenges that we're facing in the workplace, and we're trying to shift from disengagement to empowerment, from conflict to confidence, from frustration to alignment, from visionless to intentionality, and from micromanagement to trust. Those are some challenges I'm sure you've all dealt with or at least heard of in the workplace, probably in your workplace, probably in your team and your organization. To help us move the needle, to elevate productivity, to elevate workplace engagement, which is what I'm all about, we have to be able to measure to some degree. So I want to share with you a few of the ideas that I have in terms of measuring and to elevate workplace engagement. What are some of the metrics that we can possibly use? So here we go. What we really want to focus on is using metrics to drive company culture, which will drive engagement, which will drive productivity. And it's actually going to make the workplace, I hate to say it, but fun place to be. Our lives and our work are intermingled. It's hard to separate the two, although we do the best we can. But our lives certainly come into the workplace. And I think some of the things we deal with in our lives and some of the skills we have are also critical to the workplace. This video, however, is focusing on those metrics that we're going to be using in the workplace to measure company culture. So with the Elev8 workplace engagement model, we not only create a playbook of tools that you can use, but also what are some of the metrics I can use to measure to see if I'm moving the needle or not. So let's take a look. Dun, 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 dun. So first of all, employing engagement surveys, that's easy for you to say, but conducting surveys, you can measure satisfaction or engagement or culture, a lot of different things that can be measured out there, but use some sort of a tool. I worked with a business that used a variation of the Gallup 12 survey, took and adapted the questions to their workplace. And now they regularly survey their employees to see if they're moving the needle, at least on the different things that are important to them, at least in the early stages of engagement and in the early stages of developing their culture team. And surveys, obviously, they look at your work environment, your leadership, your company values, in some cases, individual values. And all those things are so critically important to what goes on in the workplace. So being a non-data driven person and talking about data, I thought I'd give at least some statistics for each of these. So according to Gallup, as you can very well read, U.S. employee engagement declined to 31%. That's a 10-year low in engagement. So it's not just a pandemic thing. It's not just a whatever thing you can point your finger at. It's not just a Republican, Democrat thing. Whatever you want to point your finger at, it's a thing in the workplace that's continuing to decline. Now, one thing I'll point out is that remote work has increased. So is there any sort of a correlation there? Is there any sort of a connection there? We're not going to argue that in this video, but we do know that workplace engagement is declining and has continued to decline for at least 10 years. Kind of a scary statistic. So let's look at the next idea here. That's retention and turnover rates, right? So if we're going to measure, we need to look at those rates. And there are some things that are fairly clear. One is that high retention rates will mean a great positive culture, a positive company culture. I was talking to a CEO of a company the other day, lining up to do a keynote presentation at a full staff meeting, and he said that their employee retention rate is at 92%, which is incredible. I mean, that's amazing. However, they're not stopping there. They're still doing different things. They have a kind of a culture team, a culture club. They do some reading of leadership books. So they do a lot of things, not just donuts and parties, to really help with that retention rate. So, but it is something that you can certainly measure. So also on the other side of the coin, high turnover is going to indicate that there are some issues going on in the workplace. And what you want to try to do through the workplace, or excuse me, through the survey and through working with your teams, your organization, across departments, whatever the case might be, learn what those issues are. And there are some ways to do that. If you have strong learning cultures, you have a 30 to 50% higher engagement and retention rates. Okay, so that culture, that learning culture, is really critical to improving those numbers. Number three, employee feedback and exit interviews. Obviously, employee feedback is key. That's why you do the surveys. But you can also do exit interviews or employees as employees are leaving. Now, sometimes, they aren't willing to share, or what they share is somewhat guarded. But sometimes you can get some really interesting nuggets out of that, and it'll reveal hopefully some strengths and hopefully some weaknesses as well that you can take back to your team and figure out, okay, how can we tackle these and how can we hit them head on? The better alternative, I think, is a stay interview. Find out what's impacting people, not only a survey, but also maybe during your staff evaluation process, or hopefully you're meeting with your staff on a regular basis, having those kinds of conversations, sometimes uncomfortable, where you can get to why people are staying or why they might be even thinking about leaving before they actually walk out the door. It's especially important with people who are your quality folks. Another statistic, so Dell does an engagement survey. They call it Dell, and engagement there dropped from 68 to 48 within 1 year. 68 to 40 within a year. That's a huge drop. So what's going on in the workplace? And if you haven't identified that intentionally, you're making a huge mistake. And in some cases, maybe the jackasses are staying, and the jackasses, are staying, and the people who you want to stay, your quality workers, your engaged workers, are leaving because they're just fed up with it because there's no change happening. So, got an offer for a complimentary ebook. Some of you already have it, and that's awesome. You can use the QR code here, the website, toddkukan.com, but it's called The 7 Deadly Mistakes Every Great Leader Avoids. So, just a little bonus complimentary leadership guide for you to look at as you're considering and as we have conversations about what you might want to do in your workplace. So, let's continue on with number 4. Obviously, you want to look at performance and productivity metrics. You do want to move the needle on that through your different culture initiatives, through elevating workplace engagement. So assessing productivity levels and seeing if you can find any connections there. Are there certain parts of your organization, sales or marketing or HR or the product developers or service, the people who deliver the service? Where might those performance challenges be based on the metrics that you're using? Understand if employees, do they understand the goals? Do you understand the vision, mission, values, and goals of your organization? Again, great to have it painted on the wall and the pretty colors and everything, but how are you engaging your employees in that? Both in making decisions about what they are and also in constantly keeping them in front of them. Now, you're not micromanaging. That's the worst thing you can do, right? Because we want to build trust. That's the whole key to this. But understanding if they know the goals and the roles they're supposed to play. Highly engaged workers have 21% higher profitability and 17% higher productivity. Pretty impressive stats. Even if those are 50% wrong, even if it's 10.5 and what would that be, 8.5%, still culture impacts your productivity, culture impacts your profitability. More importantly, culture impacts your employees and how they feel about the organization. And how will they share that with other people you might be recruiting or other people in the community in general? Innovation and creativity, another thing to look at and to measure. Encourage creativity, encourage risk-taking. People have to get out of their comfort zones, and workers don't fear anything more than change. And quite honestly, we all fear change in our lives. But helping people, taking some risk and getting through and fighting through what change might be. There's always change. There's never going to be a new normal. That was something that was talked about a lot during the pandemic, but I don't think there is such a thing as a new normal. There's always going to be change, and there better be change. You better figure out how to intentionally improve your culture, engage your employees, and get them working towards great productivity. Utilize resources you have that are underutilized. Figure out what you have as an organization, and then utilize those organizations. A lot of programs have great EAP programs, and they're not utilizing them. And there are some ways to do that, some simple ways to do that. Statistically, employees or companies like Google that support mental health with employee assistance programs get a 4-to-1 return on their investment. Again, even if that's off by half, there's an improvement on their investment. But mental health is a huge issue in the workplace. It's an overused term, because people think of mental illness, which has a bad connotation to it, a bad stereotype. But quite honestly, we all have baggage we bring in. We all need help in some way or shape or form. So the employee assistance program is a great way to do that and to tie that in with your culture playbook. What about clients or customer feedback? Customer satisfaction talks a lot about your internal culture, excuse me. And if your employees are happy, your client and customers will be happy. I remember hearing from Craig Culver, from if you're familiar with the Culver restaurants that are around the country, and particularly they started here in Wisconsin, which is pretty interesting. But anyway, he always said the customer doesn't come first, the employee comes first. And the reason the employee comes first is because he or she impacts the customer and how they feel about the organization. So make sure you have a clear understanding where your clients and your customers are feeling, and even to some degree your vendors as well. So are you using metrics to help determine that? Companies with recognition-rich cultures have 31% lower voluntary turnover rates. Again, recognize your staff for good customer relations. Diversity and inclusion metrics, evaluate your inclusivity. How are people, particularly the area that I pay a lot of attention to is generational differences. We know, or I preach that differences make us better. So how are we determining that? How are we measuring that? How are we showing that people do respect each other, right? And utilize a generational differences plan. I touched on that. There's some different elements that you can instill in your workplace to help not only with generational inclusion, but also impacting your culture as a whole. Because we know that generations are different, right? So let's have the generations help each other. Talk about reverse mentoring, which is where younger generations will impact and mentor older generations. We have 5 generations in the workplace, so it's a critical element. Organizations with strong culture experience 65% lower turnover rates. I think you get the idea and understand the statistics. So in order to elevate workplace engagement, we do need to have some metrics in place. I've given you some examples of some. If you want my complimentary ebook, 7 Deadly Mistakes Every Great Leader Avoids, feel free to scan on the QR code, or you can go to toddkukan.com. But let's change the workplace culture. I've been in some great cultures. I've been in some horrible cultures. And I'm on a mission to revolutionize company culture and leadership. And this company, let me try it one more time. This culture playbook that's part of the Elev8 Workplace Engagement Initiative can help you do that. So let's reach out. Check me out on LinkedIn. Check me out on Facebook. I've got a website, whatever you need, but let's be intentional. Be intentional about employee engagement in your workplace. Have a great day.